Welcome to Luxury Empire Stories.
Owen adjusted his custom Armani tie, his mocking laugh echoing through the grand ballroom. Stella? She's just the wife. A glorified maid, really, he sneered to his corporate colleagues, not caring that she stood mere inches away, her cheeks burning. For 5 years, Stella had swallowed the humiliation, the late-night absences, and the blatant disrespect. She lowered her gaze, clutching her frayed clutch purse, as Chloe, Owen's glamorous mistress, smirked from his side. But the cruel laughter died instantly when Arthur Caroline, the famously ruthless billionaire of Caroline Global, stepped up to the microphone. The room fell dead silent, as the titan of industry pointed directly at the unassuming woman in the faded dress. "Ladies and gentlemen," Arthur announced, his voice like thunder, "allow me to introduce my granddaughter, Stella, and the sole heir to my empire." The rain in Seattle battered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the luxury downtown apartment, an apartment Stella Hayes had turned into a home, but one that Owen Montgomery only treated as a hotel. Stella stood in the kitchen, carefully garnishing a plate of seared scallops. Her hands, calloused from her daily work restoring antique manuscripts at a modest local bindery, moved with practiced precision. Tonight was supposed to be special. It was their 5th wedding anniversary. She had spent a week's wages on the ingredients, hoping to recreate the meal they had shared on their honeymoon in a small coastal town in Maine. The front door clicked open. Owen walked in, bringing the chill of the November evening with him. He didn't call out to her. He didn't announce his arrival. Instead, the heavy thud of his Italian leather briefcase hitting the entryway console was his only greeting. "Owen?" Stella called out, wiping her hands on a towel. "Dinner is almost ready. Zahnpasta." Owen appeared in the archway of the kitchen. He was a strikingly handsome man, with sharp features and cold, calculating blue eyes that had once looked at her with warmth, but now only held a perpetual glint of irritation. He was a senior director at Caldwell & Associates, a predatory commercial real estate firm, and his ambition was a living, breathing entity in their marriage, a third partner that took up all the space in the room. "I'm not hungry," he said flatly, loosening his tie. He barely glanced at the intricately prepared table setting. "I ate at the club with Harrison and some of the partners." Stella felt a familiar, cold stone drop in her stomach. "But it's our anniversary. I texted you this morning. You said you'd be home by 7. Owen let out a heavy, dramatic sigh, rubbing his temples as if Stella's very existence was a migraine. "And I got caught up." "God, Stella, do you have to be so suffocating? Some of us have actual careers to worry about. We're closing the waterfront deal tomorrow. I don't have time for playing house over cold seafood." He turned and walked toward the master bedroom. Stella stood frozen in the warm glow of the kitchen, the scent of garlic and white wine suddenly nauseating. It hadn't always been this way. When they met, Owen was a struggling junior analyst. Stella had loved his drive. She had worked 2 jobs to pay their rent, so he could focus on his licensing exams. She had proofread his proposals, ironed his cheap suits, and cheered his every minor victory. But as Owen climbed the corporate ladder, the air up there had changed him. He started wearing bespoke suits, driving a car that cost more than a house, and looking at Stella as if she were a piece of mismatched furniture he hadn't gotten around to replacing. Slowly she followed him into the bedroom. He was unbuttoning his shirt, tossing it carelessly onto the velvet armchair. As Stella reached out to pick it up, a reflex born of years of quiet servitude, a scent wafted up from the fabric. It wasn't his usual cedarwood cologne. It was heavy, floral, and expensive. Chanel No. 5. Stella's hand trembled slightly. It wasn't the first time she had caught that scent. She had smelled it on his coats, found traces of it on the passenger seat of his Audi, and seen the late-night texts from a contact saved simply as C. Carmichael. Chloe Carmichael. She was the newest junior partner at Caldwell & Associates, a woman whose family had old money and who made no secret of her disdain for wives who didn't fit the corporate mold. "Owen," Stella said softly, her voice barely a whisper. "Who is Chloe?" Owen froze. His back was to her, the muscles in his shoulders tensing. For a second, the room was terrifyingly quiet. Then he turned around, a look of utter condescension masking his momentary panic. "Are you going through my things now, Stella? Is that what you do all day, while I'm out paying for the roof over your head?" "I just picked up your shirt," she said, her voice shaking but refusing to back down. "It smells like women's perfume, and I saw her name pop up on your phone at 2 in the morning last week." Owen let out a harsh, barking laugh. He crossed the room, towering over her, using his height to intimidate her as he so often did. "Chloe is a colleague, a very important colleague with connections that could make me a managing partner by the end of the year. Not that you would understand anything about networking, spending your days gluing old paper together for minimum wage." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a vicious whisper. "You should be thanking me. Everything you have, this apartment, your clothes, the food you ruin, is because of me. You're nothing without me, Stella. So don't you dare question how I secure our future." He snatched the shirt from her hands and walked into the master bathroom, slamming the door shut. Stella stood alone in the bedroom, staring at the closed door. A tear slipped down her cheek, but she didn't sob. The sadness was rapidly being eclipsed by something else, a quiet, burning realization. Owen thought she was nothing. He thought she was a destitute charity case who had lucked into his brilliant orbit. He didn't know the truth. He didn't know that Stella Hayes was a ghost, a carefully constructed alias to escape a legacy so heavy it had nearly crushed her. 6 years ago, she had walked away from trust funds, bodyguards, and a billionaire grandfather who controlled his family like chess pieces. She had wanted to prove she could survive on her own, without the Caroline name. And she had. But in her desperation for a simple, normal life, she had shackled herself to a man who valued everything she had intentionally left behind. 2 weeks after the disastrous anniversary, the tension in the apartment was thick enough to choke on. Owen had stopped pretending. The late nights became more frequent, and he no longer bothered to hide his phone when it buzzed with Chloe's messages. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Stella had taken a rare half-day off from the bindery because she had a sudden, severe migraine. She came home at 2 p.m., expecting the apartment to be empty. Instead, she heard voices coming from the living room. Stella slipped off her shoes, her socked feet making no sound on the hardwood floor as she crept down the hallway. "I just don't understand why you don't divorce her, Owen," a woman's voice purred. It was a smooth, cultured voice, dripping with privilege. Stella peeked around the corner. Chloe Carmichael was sitting on Stella's beige linen sofa, her long, impeccably manicured legs crossed. She was drinking espresso from one of Stella's favorite ceramic mugs. Owen was standing near the window, swirling a glass of scotch. "It's complicated, Chloe," Owen said, though he didn't sound particularly bothered. "It's about optics. Caldwell is old school. He likes family men. If I dump my wife of 5 years right before the partner evaluations, it looks unstable. So you're just going to drag this mouse along forever?" Chloe rolled her eyes, setting the mug down on the glass coffee table with a sharp clack. "I've seen her, Owen. She looks like a substitute teacher. She wore off-the-rack polyester to the company Christmas party. It's embarrassing for you." Owen chuckled, a cruel, dismissive sound that drove a spike straight through Stella's chest. "She's useful for now. She keeps the house clean. She stays out of my way. Besides, where would she go? She has no family, no money, and a pathetic little job. I'd have to pay alimony out the nose just to keep her off food stamps." Stella clamped a hand over her mouth. The sheer casualness of his cruelty was staggering. He wasn't just cheating on her. He despised her. He viewed her as a convenient, pathetic pet. "Well," Chloe said, standing up and smoothing her designer pencil skirt. She walked over to Owen, wrapping her arms around his neck. "You'd better figure it out by the Caroline Gala next month. My father secured us a table. The inner circle table. Arthur Caroline himself is going to be there. I am not walking into the social event of the decade while you're dragging that dead weight." "I wouldn't dream of it," Owen murmured, leaning down to kiss her. "I told her I have a mandatory corporate retreat that weekend. You and I are going together. Just the two of us." Stella didn't stay to watch the rest. She backed away silently, grabbed her coat, and slipped out the front door, pulling it shut with a quiet click. She walked for hours through the misty streets of Seattle. Her chest felt hollowed out, scraped clean of the love and loyalty she had poured into Owen Montgomery for half a decade. He thought she was trapped. He thought she was helpless. When Stella finally returned to the apartment, it was pitch black. Chloe was gone, and Owen was asleep in the master bedroom. Stella walked into a small office, a converted closet where she kept her bookbinding supplies. She locked the door behind her. Kneeling on the floor, she reached under the bottom drawer of her desk, feeling for a false panel she had installed years ago. Her fingers caught the edge of the wood, and she pried it loose. Inside was a small, velvet-lined lockbox. Stella pulled it out and set it on the desk. She stared at it for a long time. Opening this box meant opening the door to the past she had sworn never to return to. It meant dealing with Arthur Caroline, a man whose love was measured in corporate shares and whose anger could ruin countries. But Owen had left her nothing else. He had stripped her of her dignity, her home, and her marriage. With a deep breath, Stella unlocked the box. Inside lay a few items: a passport bearing the name Stella Josephine Caroline, a photograph of her late mother, and a heavy, solid black titanium credit card with no numbers on it, only a microchip and an insignia of a golden eagle. The Caroline crest. Beneath the card was a single business card. It had one phone number on it, the private direct line to her grandfather's executive assistant, a number that bypassed secretaries, board members, and security. Stella picked up her phone. Her hands were no longer shaking. The tears were completely gone, replaced by a cold, sharp resolve that felt remarkably like the man whose blood ran in her veins. She dialed the number. It rang exactly twice before a crisp, professional voice answered. "Caroline Executive Office. State your clearance code." "This is Stella," she said, her voice steady and clear. "Tell my grandfather I'm ready to come home." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, followed by the frantic sound of a chair scraping against the floor. "Miss Stella, good God, hold the line. Please hold the line." A minute passed. Then the line clicked. "Stella!" The voice was older now, gravelly and rough, like sandpaper on stone, but the absolute authority in it hadn't diminished a fraction. Arthur Caroline. "Hello, grandfather," Stella said. 6 years, the billionaire rumbled. 6 years you let me think you were lost to the wind, living like a peasant. What changed your mind?" Stella looked out the small window of her office, gazing at the glittering skyline of the city, a city her grandfather practically owned. She thought of Owen, sleeping comfortably down the hall, secure in his arrogance. She thought of Chloe's mocking laughter. "I learned a lesson about the real world, grandfather," Stella said, a dangerous edge creeping into her tone. "I learned that if you don't wield your power, someone else will use it to crush you." A low, vibrating chuckle came through the receiver. It was the sound of a predator recognizing its own kin. "And who, pray tell, tried to crush you?" "My husband," Stella replied. "Owen Montgomery." Montgomery, Arthur mused, the name rolling around in his mouth like a bad taste. "Never heard of him. But I assure you, my dear, by tomorrow morning, I will know everything about him. What do you want me to do?" Stella traced the golden eagle on the black card. "Nothing. Yet. You're hosting a gala next month, aren't you? Owen is desperate to attend. The winter charity gala. Yes, I'll be making an appearance. Should I have him barred at the door?" "No," Stella said, her eyes narrowing as a plan formed in her mind. A plan forged from 5 years of suppressed brilliance and quiet observation. "I want you to let him in. I want him to get the best seat in the house, and I want to be the one standing next to you when you make your keynote speech." Arthur Caroline laughed again, and this time it was a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. "Welcome back, Stella. Your car will be waiting downstairs in 10 minutes. Stella hung up the phone. She didn't pack a bag. She didn't leave a note. She simply walked out of the apartment, leaving her wedding ring sitting perfectly centered on the kitchen counter, right next to the receipt for Chloe's Cartier bracelet she had found in his coat pocket earlier that week. Let Owen think she had run away in defeat. Let him think she was broken. The mouse was gone. The Heir was awake. The sleek, armored Maybach glided silently through the towering iron gates of the Caroline estate, a sprawling, modern fortress, nestled on a private peninsula overlooking Puget Sound. For Stella, looking out the tinted windows, the manicured grounds and imposing stone facade were a jarring shift from the cramped, garlic-scented kitchen she had stood in only an hour prior. She had spent half a decade pretending this world didn't exist, suppressing her own lineage to appease a man who ultimately viewed her as disposable. The heavy oak doors of the manor swung open before she even reached the top of the limestone steps. Arthur Caroline stood in the grand foyer, leaning slightly on a silver-handled cane. At 78, he was a man carved from granite. His sharp, pale eyes tracked Stella's approach, missing nothing, not the frayed hem of her modest wool coat, nor the defiant, hardened set of her jaw. "You look like a refugee," Arthur stated, his voice echoing in the cavernous, marble-floored hall. It wasn't an insult, it was an assessment. "And you look exactly the same, grandfather," Stella replied, handing her damp coat to an impeccably dressed butler. She didn't break eye contact. Indestructible. A slow, terrifying smile spread across Arthur's face. He turned and gestured for her to follow him into his private study, a room lined with first-edition books, dark mahogany paneling, and the quiet hum of global financial feeds on discrete monitors. "Sit," he commanded, pouring 2 glasses of 18-year-old Macallan. He handed her one. "So, Owen Montgomery, a mid-level parasite at Caldwell & Associates. I had my security chief pull his file the moment you called." Stella took a sip of the scotch, letting the burn anchor her. "You work fast." "I don't tolerate delays, Stella, especially when it concerns my blood," Arthur growled, sitting heavily behind his massive desk. He slid a thick leather folder across the polished wood. "Montgomery is ambitious, I'll give him that. He's currently trying to leverage a massive commercial waterfront development to secure his partnership. He's also drowning in personal debt, mortgaged up to his eyeballs to maintain the illusion of wealth." Stella opened the folder. Inside were bank statements, photographs, and internal corporate emails. There was a photo of Owen and Chloe dining at Carnley's, Seattle's most exclusive restaurant, ordering vintage champagne on a Tuesday night. Another page detailed the purchase of the Cartier bracelet Stella had found the receipt for. "He thinks I'm a charity case," Stella said softly, her fingertips tracing the edge of the photograph. "He told his mistress I was dead weight." "Men like him confuse silence with weakness," Arthur said dismissively. He leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "The question is, Stella, are you truly ready to step back into this arena? Because if you take my name again, there is no half measure. You don't just destroy this man's career. You take his dignity. You take his future. You make him a cautionary tale." Stella closed the folder. The woman who had cried over ruined scallops was dead, buried under the crushing weight of Owen's betrayal. "I want him to lose everything exactly when he thinks he's won the world. Good." Arthur's eyes gleamed with predatory approval. "Because to do that, You need to prove to me you have the iron necessary to run Caroline Global. I am opening a new, highly aggressive logistics front. We are securing rare earth and diamond mining operations in Yakutia, Siberia. Stella's eyebrows rose slightly. Yakutia? The coldest inhabited place on Earth? Precisely, Arthur nodded. The environment is brutal, and the local contractors are notoriously difficult to control. It requires a mind completely detached from sentimentality. I need someone ruthless to oversee the supply chain acquisitions. It will be your first official project as my named successor. Can you handle the ice, Stella? Or will you freeze? Stella met his gaze without blinking. She thought of the coldness in Owen's eyes when he looked at her. She had already survived the most bitter chill a person could endure, the utter indifference of someone she loved. Send me the dossiers on the Yakutia operations tonight, Stella said, her voice smooth and devoid of hesitation. I'll have a restructuring plan on your desk by Monday. Arthur Caroline laughed, raising his glass. To the Heir. The next morning began the erasure of the invisible wife. Arthur brought in Beatrice, a legendary private stylist from Paris, along with a team of tailors and cosmetologists. The cheap polyester dresses and sensible shoes were burned. In their place came an arsenal of bespoke power suits from Tom Ford, silk blouses from Loro Piana, and custom stilettos that sounded like gavels striking the floor. Her mousy brown hair was cut into a sharp, striking asymmetrical bob, and dyed a deep, rich raven black. When Stella looked in the floor-to-ceiling mirror 3 days later, the woman staring back was a stranger. She wore a tailored, crimson pantsuit that fit like armor. Her neck was adorned with a simple, breathtaking diamond choker, a piece from the Caroline family vault. She radiated wealth, untouchable power, and imminent danger. Stella Josephine Caroline was ready for war. Across the city, in the sterile, high-end apartment Owen Montgomery called his own, the air was thick with smug satisfaction. It was a Thursday morning. Owen stood in front of his closet, admiring his reflection as he adjusted the cuffs of his new Brioni shirt. When he had woken up the morning after his fight with Stella to find the apartment empty, he had felt a fleeting moment of annoyance. When he found her cheap, cubic zirconia wedding band sitting on the kitchen counter next to the Cartier receipt, that annoyance had blossomed into pure, unadulterated relief. She had finally taken the hint. Darling, does this tie work with the navy lapel? Owen called out. Chloe Carmichael sauntered into the bedroom, wearing one of Owen's oversized dress shirts, and nothing else. She held a steaming cup of coffee, her blonde hair perfectly tousled. She looked at the ring sitting carelessly on the nightstand, and smirked. It looks perfect, Chloe purred, wrapping her free arm around his waist. I still can't believe she actually left. No tears, no begging, just vanished. I told you she was weak, Owen chuckled, turning to kiss her forehead. She probably ran back to whatever miserable, small-town life she came from. Honestly, Chloe, it's a weight off my shoulders. I don't have to hide anymore. I don't have to pretend to care about her pathetic little bindery job. We can finally focus on what matters. The Winter Charity Gala, Chloe said, her eyes lighting up with greedy anticipation. My father spoke to Richard Caldwell yesterday. He said Caroline Global is looking to acquire a massive block of commercial real estate in the downtown sector. If you can get Arthur Caroline's ear at that gala, Owen, the partnership is yours. Owen's chest swelled with pride. He grabbed his Rolex from the dresser and strapped it onto his wrist. I'm not just going to get his ear, Chloe. I'm going to hand him the waterfront development proposal on a silver platter. We have the premier table. I'm going to make sure Arthur Caroline knows exactly who I am. The hubris radiating from Owen was intoxicating to him. He practically floated into the offices of Caldwell and Associates that morning. The air in the firm was electric. The Winter Charity Gala was the defining social and corporate event of the Pacific Northwest, and securing an invitation was a status symbol. Securing a seat near Arthur Caroline was akin to a knighthood. Richard Caldwell, the firm's aging, ruthless founder, called Owen into his glass-walled office just before lunch. "Montgomery!" Caldwell barked, gesturing to a leather chair. "Sit." Owen sat, projecting an air of calm confidence. "Morning, Richard. The waterfront contracts are in their final revision stages." "Forget the contracts for a second," Caldwell said, leaning forward, his eyes narrowing. "I just got a call from the gala organizers. There's been a seating rearrangement. Your table, the one Chloe's father secured, has been moved." Owen felt a brief spike of panic. "Moved? To the back?" "No," Caldwell said, a rare look of awe crossing his wrinkled face. "Moved to the VIP dais. You and Chloe are seated directly adjacent to the Caroline family table. I don't know who you impressed, Owen, but Arthur Caroline's private secretary specifically requested you be placed in his direct line of sight." Owen's heart hammered against his ribs. He had done it. His networking, his aggressive tactics, his sheer brilliance. It had all caught the attention of the apex predator of the corporate world. Arthur Caroline had noticed him. "I've been making moves, Richard," Owen lied smoothly, leaning back in his chair with a practiced, modest smile. "I knew Caroline was looking for aggressive talent. I must have crossed his radar." "Don't screw this up, Montgomery," Caldwell warned, though he looked deeply impressed. "If you land Caroline as a client, you're not just a partner. You're my successor." Owen left the office feeling like a god. He immediately dialed Chloe's number. "Cancel all your appointments for tomorrow," Owen commanded the moment she answered. "We are going to the Van Cleef & Arpels boutique. I want you dripping in diamonds for this gala. Caroline's people personally requested us at the VIP dais." Chloe shrieked with delight through the phone. "Owen, you're a genius. We're going to rule this city." For the next 3 weeks, Owen and Chloe lived in a state of euphoric delusion. Owen maxed out 2 credit cards to purchase a custom-tailored tuxedo that cost more than Stella had made in a year. Chloe spent afternoons at elite spas and high-end boutiques, carelessly throwing Owen's platinum card at cashiers to secure the most show-stopping emerald green gown in the city. They walked through the world believing they were untouchable. Owen didn't spare a single thought for Stella. He didn't wonder if she was eating, if she had a place to sleep, or how she was surviving the biting Seattle winter. To him, she was a discarded husk, an embarrassing misstep from his past that he had successfully scrubbed away. He spent his evenings meticulously rehearsing his pitch for Arthur Caroline. He memorized financial projections, practiced his handshake in the mirror, and perfected the charming, deferential smile he planned to use on the billionaire. He was entirely oblivious to the fact that his every move was being monitored. In her grandfather's study, Stella sat reviewing the security feeds and financial intercepts her team had compiled. She watched a muted video of Owen and Chloe laughing as they exited a luxury boutique laden with shopping bags. Arthur walked into the room, glancing at the screen. He had just returned from a high-level briefing regarding the new supply lines in Yakutia, Siberia, an initiative Stella had flawlessly architected over the past 2 weeks, saving the company millions in potential logistical freezes. "He looks awfully happy for a man standing on a trapdoor," Arthur noted dryly. Stella tapped a key on her laptop, closing the video feed. Her eyes were devoid of any warmth. "Let him enjoy the view from the top, grandfather. It will make the fall that much more devastating." "The gala is tomorrow night," Arthur said, handing her a physical copy of the finalized guest list. Owen Montgomery and Chloe Carmichael were highlighted in bold, right next to the Caroline names. "Are you ready to introduce yourself to high society, Stella?" Stella stood up, smoothing the front of her dark, tailored trousers. She looked out the window at the dark, churning waters of the Puget Sound. "I'm not just going to introduce myself," Stella said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper. "I'm going to make sure he never forgets my name." The grand ballroom of the Fairmont Olympic Hotel in downtown Seattle had been transformed into a crystalline wonderland. Thousands of white orchids cascaded from the vaulted ceilings, illuminated by the cold, brilliant light of a dozen massive baccarat crystal chandeliers. The air tasted of vintage Dom Perignon, expensive perfume, and cutthroat ambition. This was the undisputed apex of high society in the Pacific Northwest, a gathering of politicians, tech magnates, and legacy wealth. Owen Montgomery stepped out of his leased Audi A8, tossing the keys to the valet with an arrogant flick of his wrist. He adjusted the lapels of his Brioni tuxedo, his chest puffed out like a peacock. Beside him, Chloe Carmichael emerged, shivering slightly in the crisp November air, but looking undeniably stunning in an emerald green Oscar de la Renta gown that clung to her every curve. "We made it, Owen," Chloe whispered, linking her arm through his as the flashbulbs of society photographers popped around them. "Look at this. We belong here." "Of course we do," Owen replied, flashing a practiced, charming smile at a passing city councilman. "Tonight is just the beginning. Once Caroline sees the waterfront proposal, we'll be hosting this gala next year." They glided into the foyer, peeling off their coats and grabbing flutes of champagne from passing waiters. Owen's eyes immediately began scanning the room, hunting for his prey. He spotted Richard Caldwell holding court near an ice sculpture, laughing aggressively with a group of banking executives. Caldwell caught Owen's eye and gave a subtle, approving nod. "Table 2, Mr. Montgomery," a white-gloved usher murmured, checking a gold-embossed iPad. "Right this way. You are seated directly adjacent to the Caroline family table." Owen's heart did a triumphant drum roll. As they were led through the maze of silk-draped tables, he noticed the whispers following them. People were noticing his placement. They were wondering who this rising star from Caldwell and Associates was, to be granted such proximity to the throne. They arrived at table 2. Owen took his seat, feeling a rush of absolute power. He patted the breast pocket of his tuxedo, feeling the thick, high-grade paper of the waterfront proposal resting against his ribs. "Owen, look," Chloe muttered, tapping his knee under the table. She nodded toward table 1, the VIP dais, which was cordoned off by discreet, broad-shouldered security personnel. Arthur Caroline had arrived. The billionaire moved through the crowd not with a rush, but with the slow, deliberate gravity of a planet in orbit. People parted for him instinctively. He was engaged in deep conversation with a woman standing with her back to Owen. Owen squinted, trying to get a better look at her. She was tall, draped in a breathtaking, custom-fitted black velvet gown that plunged in the back, revealing a spine straight as an arrow. Her raven hair was cut into a sharp, intimidating bob, catching the light of the chandeliers. Even from behind, she radiated an aura of terrifying, absolute authority. "Who is that?" Chloe asked, her voice tinged with sudden, sharp insecurity. She unconsciously adjusted her own neckline. "She's wearing the Caroline Legacy diamonds. I recognize the choker from a Vogue retrospective last year. Is it a new CEO?" "Probably some foreign dignitary or a board member he's grooming," Owen said dismissively, though he couldn't take his eyes off the woman's commanding posture. "It doesn't matter. She's just a gatekeeper. I'm going straight to Arthur." For the next hour, Owen networked with ruthless efficiency. He shook hands, dropped calculated compliments, and subtly undermined his competitors in the real estate sector. He felt unstoppable. The nagging memory of Stella, the quiet, mousy woman he had discarded like junk mail, hadn't crossed his mind once. Why would it? He was swimming with sharks now. He had evolved. But as the lights in the ballroom began to dim, signaling the start of the evening's formal program, a strange, creeping unease began to settle in the pit of Owen's stomach. Table 1 remained partially empty. The mysterious woman in black had vanished into the VIP backstage area, and Arthur Caroline was making his way towards the podium. "Showtime," Chloe whispered, squeezing his hand. Owen took a deep breath, preparing to make his move the second the speeches concluded. He had no idea the trap had already been sprung, and the jaws were about to snap shut. A hush fell over the grand ballroom, so profound that the clinking of a single silver fork against a porcelain plate sounded like a gunshot. The 50-piece orchestra faded into silence as Arthur Caroline gripped the edges of the mahogany podium. He didn't use notes. He simply stared out at the sea of billionaires, politicians, and socialites, his pale eyes pinning them to their seats. "Good evening," Arthur's voice boomed, deep and gravelly, echoing through the state-of-the-art sound system. "We gather tonight under the banner of charity. We write our checks, we wear our finest, and we congratulate ourselves on our generosity." A nervous ripple of laughter moved through the crowd, but Owen leaned forward, hanging on every word. "But true power, true legacy, is not built in comfortable ballrooms like this one," Arthur continued, his tone turning hard and unforgiving. "It is built in the cold. Over the past month, Caroline Global has launched a hostile expansion into the diamond and rare earth supply chains of Yakutia, Siberia." Murmurs of shock rippled through the room. Yakutia was notorious, a frozen wasteland where corporate deals usually died in the ice. It is an environment that forgives nothing. It crushes weakness, sentimentality, and hesitation, Arthur stated, his eyes scanning the front tables, his gaze briefly, imperceptibly, locked onto Owen. "To conquer a territory like that, you cannot rely on arrogance. Arrogance makes you blind. It makes you careless. It makes you discard the very things that hold true value." Owen frowned slightly. The words felt strangely pointed, but his ego quickly shielded him. He assumed Arthur was talking about rival firms. Yes, Owen thought. Ruthless. That's exactly what my waterfront deal is. For years, the financial world has speculated about the future of Caroline Global, Arthur said, his voice dropping to a theatrical, dangerous lull. "You have wondered who will take the reins when I am gone. Some of you have tried to position yourselves to steal pieces of my empire, assuming there was no bloodline left to defend it." The silence in the room became suffocating. Chloe gripped Owen's forearm, her manicured nails digging into his tuxedo jacket. "You assumed wrong," Arthur declared, standing to his full, imposing height. "For 6 years, my sole heir chose to live among you. She chose to strip away the protection of our wealth to learn how the world truly operates. She learned how cruel, how utterly transactional men can be when they think they hold the power over someone who has none." Owen felt a cold drop of sweat slide down his spine. His breath hitched. A bizarre, impossible thought flickered in the back of his mind, but he forcefully, violently shoved it down. No. Impossible. She was the architect of the Yakutia expansion. She secured the supply lines in 2 weeks, a feat my board said was impossible, Arthur said, a rare, terrifying smile crossing his face. She has proven that she possesses the iron will necessary to rule. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce the new Executive Vice President of Caroline Global, my granddaughter, and my sole heir. Arthur extended his hand toward the edge of the stage. Stella Josephine Caroline. The spotlight snapped to the left wing of the stage. A figure stepped out of the shadows. It was the woman in the black velvet gown. The woman wearing the legacy diamonds. The woman Chloe had envied from across the room. She walked to the center of the stage with a slow, predatory grace, her stilettos clicking rhythmically against the polished wood. She reached the podium. She turned her head, the sharp angle of her raven hair falling perfectly into place. She looked out at the audience, her expression a mask of beautiful, terrifying ice. At table 2, Owen Montgomery stopped breathing, his brain completely short-circuited. The room spun wildly. The high cheekbones, the shape of her eyes, the delicate curve of her jaw. It was her. But it wasn't the mousy, exhausted woman who smelled of garlic and old paper. It wasn't the woman who had cried over a ruined anniversary dinner. This woman looked like a queen, stepping onto a battlefield to survey the dead. "Owen," Chloe choked out, her voice trembling so violently it barely registered as a whisper. Her face had drained of all color, turning a sickly, ashen gray. "Owen, is that—" Owen couldn't speak. His throat had constricted, cutting off his air supply. His hands began to shake uncontrollably. His crystal champagne flute slipped from his numb fingers, shattering against the marble floor with a sharp, violent crash. The sound drew attention. On stage, Stella didn't flinch. She slowly lowered her gaze, looking directly past the crowd, past the politicians and the CEOs, locking eyes instantly and purposefully with Owen Montgomery. The look she gave him contained no anger, no sadness, and no vindication. It was a look of pure, unadulterated, absolute apathy. She looked at him the way one looks at a bug on a windshield before turning on the wipers. "Thank you, grandfather," Stella spoke into the microphone. Her voice, amplified across the silent ballroom, was smooth, cultured, and devoid of the hesitant warmth Owen had grown so accustomed to ignoring. It sounded like old money and new ruin. "It is true," Stella continued, her eyes still holding Owen captive in a cage of his own making. "I have spent the last 5 years observing the corporate underbelly of this city. I have watched men of profound mediocrity step on the backs of others to reach for crowns they have neither the intellect nor the character to wear." Every word was a nail driven into Owen's coffin. Richard Caldwell, sitting 2 tables away, turned slowly to look at Owen. Caldwell's face morphed from confusion to dawning, absolute horror as he connected the dots. Owen had just divorced Arthur Caroline's only heir. Owen had brought his mistress to sit next to the Caroline table. "Caroline Global is evolving," Stella announced, her gaze finally snapping away from Owen to sweep over the rest of the terrified room. "We are no longer accepting proposals built on false leverage or phantom assets." She paused, letting the silence hang heavy. "In fact, effective as of an hour ago, Caroline Global has initiated a hostile takeover of Caldwell and Associates' prime creditors. We will be restructuring the firm's leadership immediately." Chaos erupted. A collective gasp echoed through the ballroom. Richard Caldwell went pale, clutching his chest. Owen sat frozen in his chair, his custom tuxedo suddenly feeling like a straitjacket. He reached instinctively into his breast pocket, his fingers brushing the thick paper of his waterfront proposal. The proposal that required Caldwell's backing. The proposal that was supposed to make him a king. It was worthless. He was worthless. Stella Caroline stood at the podium, a diamond-clad titan bathed in the spotlight, watching the empire of the man who had treated her like nothing crumble into ash at her feet. The grand ballroom of the Fairmont Olympic descended into a sophisticated, tailored pandemonium. Billionaires and board members scrambled for their phones, desperately dialing their brokers and legal teams. Stella's announcement of the hostile takeover of Caldwell and Associates' creditors had just sent a tidal wave through Seattle's financial district, and the epicenter of the earthquake was standing flawlessly at the podium, bathed in diamonds and absolute control. At table 2, Owen Montgomery was trapped in a nightmare from which he could not wake. His lungs burned, gasping for air that suddenly felt too thin. The music had stopped, but a high-pitched ringing echoed in his ears. "Owen," a voice hissed. It was Richard Caldwell. The aging founder of the real estate firm leaned over the table, his face a mottled, furious purple. His hands trembled with a mixture of rage and sheer terror. "What have you done? That is your wife." Owen opened his mouth, but only a dry, pathetic croak escaped. He looked from Caldwell's apoplectic face to the stage, where Stella was calmly stepping down, flanked immediately by a wall of broad-shouldered, private security personnel. "She's—" Owen stammered, his mind short-circuiting as he stared at the woman he had treated as a glorified maid for 5 years. She was a bookbinder. She made minimum wage. "She is a Caroline, you absolute fool," Caldwell spat, his voice trembling with unchecked fury. "You arrogant, blind imbecile. You brought her here? You paraded your mistress in front of the Caroline family table. You just destroyed my firm. You are fired, Montgomery. Effective immediately. If you ever set foot in my building again, I will have you arrested for trespassing." Caldwell turned and stormed towards the exits, desperately trying to salvage whatever was left of his sinking empire. Owen sat paralyzed, the waterfront development proposal in his breast pocket, his golden ticket, now felt like a block of lead dragging him to the bottom of the ocean. He turned to Chloe, his eyes pleading for some anchor in the storm. But Chloe Carmichael was not looking at him with love or support. She was looking at him with utter disgust. "Chloe," Owen whispered, reaching out to touch her hand. She violently snatched her arm away as if he were diseased. "Don't touch me," she snapped, her voice trembling. "Do you have any idea what you've done? My father invested heavily in Caldwell's creditors. Stella Caroline just wiped out a quarter of my family's portfolio because of you." "We can fix this," Owen begged. The confident, predatory real estate shark entirely gone, replaced by a desperate, hollow man. "I can talk to her. She loved me, Chloe. She was obsessed with me. I can explain." "Explain what?" Chloe laughed, a harsh, hysterical sound. "That you thought she was worthless? That you drained your bank accounts and maxed out your credit to buy me diamonds while she sat at home? You are toxic waste, Owen. You have nothing. You are nothing." Without another word, Chloe grabbed her designer clutch, hiked up the skirt of her emerald gown, and practically sprinted out of the ballroom, desperate to distance herself from the radioactive crater that was Owen Montgomery. Owen was left entirely alone at the VIP dais. The very people he had spent the last hour networking with now actively avoided making eye contact with him, parting like the Red Sea as he finally, unsteadily, rose to his feet. He stumbled out of the Fairmont, the crisp night air biting through his expensive, useless tuxedo. He hailed a cab, realizing with a sickening jolt that he had tossed his Audi keys to the valet and couldn't afford the exorbitant tip to get them back tonight. The next morning, the reality of his ruin fully materialized. Owen woke up on the beige linen sofa of his apartment, his head pounding. He grabbed his phone. There were 42 missed calls from his creditors, his credit card companies, and the bank that held the mortgage on his luxury apartment. With shaking hands, he opened his banking app. His accounts were frozen. Caroline Global hadn't just bought Caldwell's commercial debt. They had acquired the localized boutique banks that held Owen's personal, heavily leveraged loans. Stella had systematically, legally, and mercilessly bought his debt. She literally owned him. Driven by sheer animalistic desperation, Owen put on his wrinkled tuxedo shirt from the night before and took a bus to the Caroline Global headquarters, a towering 70-story monolith of black glass in the center of the financial district. He expected to be thrown out by security. Instead, the guards in the lobby seemed to be expecting him. They handed him a temporary guest badge and escorted him in silence to the private executive elevator. The doors opened on the top floor. Owen was led down a corridor of pristine white marble and frosted glass until they reached a massive set of double oak doors. "Miss Caroline is expecting you," the guard said, stepping aside. Owen pushed the doors open. The corner office was the size of a penthouse. Behind a desk carved from a single slab of black marble sat Stella. She was wearing a tailored charcoal suit, her dark hair sleek and perfect. She didn't look up from the tablet she was reading as he entered. "Stella," Owen breathed, stepping forward. His voice cracked. "Stella, please." She finally raised her eyes. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. There was no trace of the wife who had cooked him dinners, no trace of the woman who had cried when he forgot their anniversary. "Sit down, Owen," she commanded softly. It wasn't a request. Owen collapsed into one of the leather chairs opposite her desk. "I didn't know," he babbled, tears welling in his eyes. "I swear, if I had known who you were, I would never—" "You would never what?" Stella interrupted, her voice dangerously calm. "You would never have treated me like a stray dog. You would never have flaunted your mistress in my home. You only respect power, Owen. You only value what you can leverage. You didn't love me. You loved having someone beneath you." "That's not true," he lied, reaching across the desk. "I loved you. We were married for 5 years. You can't just throw that away." Stella slid a thick manila folder across the cold marble. It stopped inches from his trembling hands. "Divorce papers," Stella stated flatly. "You will sign them. You will contest nothing. In exchange, Caroline Global will not pursue legal action for the corporate fraud I discovered in your personal accounts while auditing your debt." Owen stared at the folder as if it were a loaded gun. "And what am I supposed to do? I have no job. I have no money. You bought my apartment's mortgage, Stella. I'm ruined." "You are exactly where you put me," Stella said, leaning back in her chair, her expression completely unreadable. "You are invisible. But unlike you, I will not force you to stay in an environment that crushes you. I have liquidated your assets to pay off your immediate debts. You have a clean slate, Owen, a completely empty one." She stood up, walking toward the floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the sprawling city of Seattle. "Sign the papers, leave your security badge at the desk, and get out of my building," she said, her back to him. "I have a flight to catch. The Yakutia operations require my personal oversight, and the ice does not wait for men who have already lost." Owen Montgomery picked up the gold pen resting on the folder. His hand shook violently as he scrawled his name on the dotted line, signing away the only thing of true value he had ever possessed. He stood up, completely broken, a ghost in a world he had once thought he ruled. He walked out of the office, the heavy oak doors clicking shut behind him, sealing his fate forever. The destruction of Owen Montgomery was not born of vengeance, but of profound, inevitable consequence. In his arrogant pursuit of superficial power, he had blinded himself to the quiet strength of the woman standing right beside him. Stella Caroline had shed her disguise, not just to reclaim some her billionaire birthright, but to teach a brutal lesson in respect. As she boarded her private jet, bound for the frozen expanses of Yakutia, she left behind the fragile shell of her former life. She was no longer the invisible wife waiting in the shadows. She was the architect of an empire, a titan of industry forged in the fires of betrayal. Owen, left entirely destitute and forgotten, learned the ultimate price of his cruelty. He had treated her like nothing, only to discover that nothing was exactly what she would leave him with in the end.